Millionaire hires a nanny for his sick son, installs cameras and discovers something shocking. The Cortez mansion stood imposingly against the Boston sky, its mirrored windows reflecting the setting October sun. Leonardo Cortez watched the city from his office on the top floor, a glass of whiskey untouched on the mahogany table. His dark brown eyes were fixed on a distant point, while his mind wandered through the empty corridors of his own life. The soft sound of the door opening brought him back to reality. Margaret, his assistant for over a decade, entered with a black folder in her hands. "Mr. Cortez, the CVs of the candidates you requested." Her voice was professional, but Leonardo detected a note of concern. She knew the situation too well to maintain total neutrality. "How many this time?" he asked, turning his chair to face her. 15. All with excellent references and experience with children who need special care. Leonardo picked up the folder, quickly flipping through the documents. Each candidate looked perfect on paper, but he knew better than anyone how appearances could be deceiving. "Schedule interviews with the top 3 for tomorrow." "Sir." Margaret hesitated. "Dr. Matthews called. He insists that Lucas needs stability. Changing babysitters every 2 months isn't—" "I pay Dr. Matthews to look after my son's health, not to give me advice on how to run my household." Leonardo cut in, his voice as icy as the wind outside. Margaret nodded, recognizing the cue to leave. Before she left, however, she stopped at the door. "Lucas asked if you'd have dinner with him tonight." A muscle tensed in Leonardo's jaw. "I have a video conference with investors in Tokyo. Tell him that—" He paused, remembering the disappointed expression his son always had when he received his apology. "Cancel the conference. I'll be there at 7. Alone again." Leonardo opened the top drawer of his desk and took out a photograph. Catherine was smiling at the picture, her green eyes shining with the same intensity that Lucas had inherited. 5 years had passed since the accident, but the pain remained as vivid as on the first day. Downstairs she heard Lucas' characteristic cough, followed by the gentle voice of Mrs. Peterson, the temporary nanny. She was the 5th this year. Leonardo knew he needed to find someone permanent, but the idea of entrusting the care of his son to a stranger terrified him. Walking down the marble stairs, he found Lucas in the living room, wrapped in his favorite blanket, watching a documentary about the oceans. When he saw him, the boy smiled, and Leonardo felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Lucas was the living image of Catherine, from his golden curls to the freckles that dotted his nose. "Dad, are you having dinner with me tonight?" "Yes, champ. How about we order that pizza you like?" Lucas's eyes lit up, but then a cough shook him. Mrs. Peterson approached with the inhaler, and Leonardo watched helplessly as his son struggled to breathe. Moments like this reminded him of how much was at stake, how much he needed to protect the only person who still mattered in his life. Later, after putting Lucas to bed, Leonardo sat in his private office, turning on the monitors that showed every room in the house. It was his nightly ritual to check that everything was in order, and that his son was safe. Tomorrow he would interview the candidates, and one of them would be chosen to be part of this hermetically controlled world he had built. Among the CVs, one name caught his eye: Isabella Martinez. Her references were impeccable, her experience with sick children extensive, but it was something about her photo that stopped him. A genuine smile that reached his eyes, unlike the rehearsed expressions of the other candidates. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was her lawyer, Richard. "Leonardo, I've received the documents for the new nanny. Do you want me to include the same confidentiality clauses?" "All of them, and add one about the security cameras. You know that can scare off good candidates, don't you?" Leonardo looked at Catherine's photo again. Anyone who has nothing to hide won't have a problem with surveillance. Hanging up the phone, he turned his attention to Isabella's CV. Tomorrow he would meet her in person, and something told him that this interview would be different from the others. Whether it was her exceptional qualifications or the sincere look in her photograph, there was something about her that piqued his curiosity, and Leonardo Cortez wasn't used to being curious about anyone. The Cortez Enterprises meeting room was silent when Isabella Martinez entered. The natural light coming in through the large windows contrasted with the austere atmosphere of the room. Dressed in a discreet navy blue ensemble, she maintained a serene posture, although her heart was beating fast. Leonardo Cortez watched her from the other side of the glass table, analyzing every detail. His eyes, trained in assessing people, noticed her delicate but firm hands, the way she maintained eye contact without showing intimidation, and above all, the calm that emanated from her presence. "Ms. Martinez," he began, his voice controlled. "Your resume is impressive. 6 years caring for children with special needs, specialization in pediatric nursing, exemplary letters of recommendation. Almost too perfect." Isabella smiled slightly. "Mr. Cortez, I learned early on that perfection is an illusion. What I offer is not perfection, but absolute dedication and honesty." The answer took him by surprise. Normally, the candidates would burst into assurances of competence. "Tell me about your last experience," he asked, leaning back in his chair. "I looked after little William for 3 years. He had cystic fibrosis. They were challenging but rewarding years. Unfortunately," she paused, and Leonardo noticed a glint of emotion in her eyes. "William passed away 6 months ago. That's when I decided I needed some time to process the loss." "And what makes you think you're ready to take on another complex case?" "Because grief taught me compassion, not fear. Your son deserves someone who understands that caring goes beyond administering medication and following protocols." Leonardo stood up and walked over to the window. "Ms. Martinez, I need to be straightforward. This position requires more than professional competence. There are security cameras throughout the house. Your privacy will be limited. Many find it too invasive. I understand your need to protect your son, Mr. Cortez. If I were in your position, I would probably do the same." She paused significantly. "But I hope that, in time, you'll realize that trust is built through actions, not surveillance." He turned, staring at her with intensity. "Are you questioning me, Miss Martinez?" "No, sir, I'm being honest." As I promised at the beginning of this conversation, a dense silence filled the room. Margaret Ayers, who was watching the interaction from the doorway, held her breath. In 15 years, she had never seen someone so subtly challenge her boss. "Would you like to meet Lucas?" Leonardo's question surprised even him. On the 4th floor of the mansion, Lucas was finishing his physiotherapy session when they entered. His green eyes lit up at the sight of his father, but it was Isabella who captured his attention. "You must be Lucas," she said, approaching with a warm smile. "I hear you're a fan of documentaries about oceans." The boy's face lit up. "Do you like them too?" "I love it. Did you know that humpback whales sing different songs every year?" Lucas laughed, a sound that made Leonardo freeze. He hadn't heard that laugh in weeks. For the next hour, Isabella talked to Lucas about abyssal seas, coral reefs, and her experience as a volunteer in an aquarium. Leonardo watched, noticing how she naturally included breathing exercises in the conversation, without Lucas realizing he was being treated. "Dad," Lucas called out when Isabella left to get some water. "She's different from the others." Leonardo nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, she is." Later, in his office, Leonardo was rereading the employment contract. Margaret came in with a cup of coffee. "The other candidates are still waiting, sir. Cancel the interviews," he replied, without taking his eyes off the document. "Miss Martinez starts tomorrow. Are you sure?" She was quite frank during the interview. Leonardo looked up. "Precisely why. Lucas needs someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth, even if it means confronting me occasionally." That evening, while checking the cameras one last time, Leonardo stopped at the recording of the conversation between Isabella and Lucas. There was something about the way she interacted with her son, a mixture of professionalism and genuine affection that he couldn't ignore. His phone vibrated with a message from Richard. "Contract sent to Miss Martinez. She has already signed and returned it. Start tomorrow at 7 a.m. Leonardo looked at the photo of Catherine on his desk. "What would you think of her, my love?" he whispered into the silence. The answer came in the form of a memory. Catherine always said that eyes don't lie, and Isabella Martinez's eyes conveyed a truth he couldn't deny. Closing the monitors, Leonardo allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who could bring light not only into Lucas's life, but into the whole house that had lived in the shadows for so long. The dawn brought with it a soft mist that covered the gardens of the Cortez mansion. Isabella arrived punctually at 7, carrying a modest bag and a small package wrapped in colored paper. Margaret greeted her in the entrance hall, her heels echoing on the marble floor. "Mr. Cortez is video conferencing, but he left detailed instructions about Lucas's routine," Margaret explained, guiding her up the stairs. "The list of medications, schedules, and emergency contacts is in his room." In the hallway on the 2nd floor, they stopped in front of a door decorated with phosphorescent stars. Margaret hesitated before opening it. Ms. Martinez. Lucas had a difficult night. The change in temperature always affects his breathing. Isabella nodded in understanding. Can I see the night's records? It would help to understand his breathing pattern. Inside the room, Lucas slept restlessly. The heart monitor next to the bed emitted a soft, steady beep. Isabella approached silently, watching the vital signs with experienced eyes. Good morning, little navigator, she whispered as Lucas began to wake up. The boy opened his eyes slowly, a faint smile appearing on his pale face. You really came. His voice was hoarse. Of course I came. And I've brought something special for you. She handed over the colorful package. Lucas carefully unwrapped it, revealing a miniature constellation projector. Wow, it's like having the universe in your bedroom. I thought we could create our own starry ocean here. But first, how about a nutritious breakfast to regain your energy? On the other side of the mansion, Leonardo watched the interaction through the cameras. Something about the naturalness with which Isabella moved around the room, the way she managed to entertain Lucas while discreetly checking his vital signs, intrigued him. Throughout the morning, Isabella established a gentle routine. She turned the breathing exercises into fun games, told stories during the nebulizer, and managed to get Lucas to take all his medication without protest. During lunch, Leonardo decided to make a surprise appearance. He found Lucas sitting at the kitchen table, eating a colorful soup that wasn't part of his usual menu. What kind of soup is that? He asked, arching an eyebrow. It's my special recipe, replied Isabella, undeterred. It's rich in nutrients and low in sodium, according to medical restrictions. The secret is in the fresh herbs. Lucas raised his spoon excitedly. Dad, try it. It's like magic. It doesn't taste like medicine. Leonardo hesitated for a moment before accepting the spoonful his son offered. The taste surprised him. It really was delicious. Mrs. Martinez, can we talk in private? In his office, Leonardo closed the door. I appreciate your initiative, but any changes to Lucas's diet need to be approved first. With all due respect, Mr. Cortez, the soup follows all dietary restrictions. I have the complete composition here. She handed over a detailed sheet. Besides, I've noticed that Lucas is resistant to eating. Turning the meal into something pleasurable could help his recovery. Leonardo studied the document, looking for flaws. He found none. There's something else I need to discuss, she continued. Lucas mentioned that he would like to see the garden. With the weather improving, a few minutes of morning sun would be beneficial for him. Absolutely not. The outside air can strengthen his immune system, under controlled conditions, interrupted Isabella. Isolating him completely from the world won't protect him forever. The silence that followed was tense. Leonardo struggled internally between his need for control and the logic of her words. 1 week, he finally said. Give me positive results in a week, and I'll consider your suggestions about outside activities. In the evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Isabella was organizing her notes when she came across a drawing he had made. 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 1 small, and 1 medium-sized, all smiling under a starry sky. Leonardo, who had spent the day alternating between meetings and monitoring the cameras, found the drawing on his desk the next morning, with a note attached. Mr. Cortez, Lucas has a heart bigger than his room and dreams bigger than his limitations. He drew this today, talking about how nice it would be to watch the stars for real one day. Sometimes the greatest acts of protection involve allowing small calculated risks. Respectfully, Isabella Martinez. Sitting back in his chair, Leonardo looked longingly at the drawing. Catherine's words echoed in his mind. Love without freedom is a gilded cage, my love. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if his protective methods weren't actually stifling Lucas' chances of living fully. On the monitor, he watched Isabella adjusting the star projector, creating a private universe on the ceiling of her son's room. Lucas laughed, pointing at the constellations, his eyes shining with a joy he hadn't seen for a long time. Perhaps, Leonardo thought, it was time he learned to let go of the reins a little. Isabella's first month at the Cortez mansion passed quickly, bringing subtle but significant changes. The most noticeable was Lucas' frequent smile, which now echoed through the previously silent corridors. Leonardo, watching through the cameras, noticed how his son seemed stronger, more lively, despite the limitations of his condition. One particularly clear morning, Leonardo canceled an important meeting when he saw on the monitor that Lucas was having a respiratory crisis. He rushed to his son's room, only to find Isabella already controlling the situation with a competence that left him speechless. "Breathe with me, Captain," she said softly, sitting behind Lucas on the bed guiding his breathing. "Remember our story about the diver. Let's go up to the surface very slowly." Lucas, leaning against her, followed her breathing rhythm, his small hands squeezing her arms. Leonardo stood in the doorway, invisible to both of them, observing the intimacy of that moment. "All right," Isabella continued. "Now tell me 3 things you can see." The star projector," Lucas breathed, calmer. "My ocean book. And Mom's picture." Leonardo felt his heart squeeze. Catherine's picture was on the bedside table, smiling eternally at the son who looked so much like her. "Great. 2 things you can touch. My blanket. And your necklace." Isabella smiled, letting Lucas play with the little anchor-shaped pendant he always wore. "Perfect. Something you can smell. The chamomile tea you make." The crisis passed gradually, leaving Lucas exhausted but stable. When he finally fell asleep, Isabella tucked him into bed with motherly care. When she turned around, she was startled to see Leonardo. "Mr. Cortez, I'm sorry I didn't see you. How long have you been using this technique with him?" "The anchoring technique. Since the 2nd week. It helps prevent panic during crises by focusing on the senses." Leonardo ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "Why wasn't I informed?" "It's in the daily report I send you," she replied softly. Page 3, paragraph 2 of last week's report. He remembered the document he had barely skimmed, too busy with mergers and acquisitions. Guilt hit him like a punch. "Mr. Cortez." Isabella hesitated before continuing. "Can I make a suggestion?" He nodded, still watching his sleeping son. "Lucas needs his father as much as he needs his medication. His presence has a therapeutic effect that no treatment can replace. I have a company to run." He defended himself, but his voice lacked conviction. "And you have a son to love," she replied firmly. "Allow me to show you something." Isabella opened a folder she kept organized in the bedroom. "These are the records of Lucas' vital signs. Notice how the numbers improve significantly when you are present. Yesterday, during the dinner you shared, his saturation remained stable for hours." Leonardo examined the graphs, his analytical gaze recognizing the patterns she was pointing out. "Why do you keep such detailed records?" "Because care isn't just about administering medication, Mr. Cortez. It's about understanding every aspect that affects his well-being." That afternoon, Leonardo canceled all his meetings. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to spend hours with Lucas, listening to him talk about his maritime discoveries, about the stories Isabella told, about his dreams of one day seeing the ocean for real. Through the security cameras, Isabella discreetly watched the interaction between father and son, a soft smile on her lips. Margaret approached her in the monitor room. "First time I've seen him like this since Catherine left," the assistant commented. "He's so afraid of losing Lucas that sometimes he forgets to live it." Isabella replied, "How did you manage to convince him?" "I didn't. I just showed him that love and protection don't have to be mutually exclusive." In the evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Leonardo found Isabella in the kitchen, preparing the chamomile tea that her son loved so much. "Miss Martinez." "Isabella. Please." "Isabella." He corrected himself. "Thank you. For today. For everything." She smiled, that genuine smile that had intrigued him since the first interview. "Lucas is an extraordinary boy, Mr. Cortez. He doesn't just need to survive. He deserves to flourish." Leonardo picked up a cup of tea, smelling the soft aroma. Catherine used to say something like that. It was the first time he had mentioned his late wife voluntarily to anyone in years. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but full of mutual understanding. That night, before going to sleep, Leonardo turned off the cameras in Lucas' room for the first time. Some things, he realized, needed to be felt with the heart, not monitored by screens. Autumn was painting the mansion's gardens in golden hues when Isabella completed 2 months of work. The routine had settled comfortably, and even Leonardo was beginning to relax his strict security protocols. However, an accidental discovery was about to shake up the harmony that had been achieved. During a particularly hectic afternoon, while organizing some documents in Leonardo's office at his request, Isabella accidentally knocked over an old folder. As she picked up the scattered papers, her eyes caught something that made her freeze. A police report about the accident that had killed Catherine Cortez. Normally, she would have put it away immediately, respecting her employer's privacy. But one sentence jumped out at her. Suspicious circumstances regarding brake system failure. "What are you doing?" Leonardo's voice startled her. He was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of restrained fury. "Mr. Cortez, I'm sorry. The briefcase fell and I—" "Get out." His voice was pure ice. "Please let me explain. Get out." The scream reverberated through the walls, making Isabella back away. In the hallway, she found Lucas, startled by the noise. "What happened to Dad?" "Nothing, darling. Sometimes adults need a moment alone." She led him to his room, trying to remain outwardly calm while his heart was pounding. Hours later, when Lucas finally fell asleep, Isabella found an envelope in his bag. Inside was a large check and a note. "Your services are no longer required." Instead of collecting her things and leaving, she did something unexpected. She went to Leonardo's office. She found him sitting in the dark, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. "You can't fire me." Leonardo looked up in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "Lucas has an important appointment tomorrow. Next week we start aquatic physiotherapy. In 3 days' time he has a presentation on the whale project. I'm not going to abandon him in the middle of all this." "You've crossed every line." "No, Mr. Cortez. You've built so many walls that you've forgotten there are people on the other side." She took a deep breath. "Including your son. Don't you dare mention—" "Lucas asks about his mother every day. And do you know what he wants to know most? If she loved him. Because his father never talks about her. Never shares memories, never." "Enough." Leonardo stood up abruptly, knocking over his glass. "You don't know anything about loss." "I know more than you think." She replied softly. "William wasn't the first patient I lost. And each loss has taught me that silence doesn't protect. It suffocates." The silence that followed was deafening. Leonardo staggered to the window, his back stiff with tension. "It was my fault," he whispered at last. "Catherine wanted to go to Lucas's recital. I was busy with an important merger. I said I'd send the driver, but she insisted on going alone. If I'd gone, the accident wouldn't have happened," added Isabella gently. "Or would I have lost them both?" Leonardo turned, his eyes shining with restrained tears. "The report. There were suspicions of sabotage. A competitor out to get me. Catherine died because of me. She died because someone committed a terrible crime. It's not your fault. How can you be so sure?" "Because I see how you protect Lucas. How you would sacrifice everything for him. The man I love, Catherine, wouldn't be able to." She stopped abruptly, realizing what she had said. Leonardo noticed too, his eyes meeting hers with intensity. "Miss Martinez, I'm sorry." She retreated towards the door. "That was inappropriate." "Isabella," he called, using her first name for the second time since she had arrived. "Please stay." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. "Lucas needs you," he continued. "And maybe I do too." At that moment, a scream came from Lucas's room. They both ran, finding the boy sitting on the bed, crying after a nightmare. "Mommy," he sobbed. "I dreamt about Mommy." Leonardo hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the bed and pulled his son into his arms. "Do you want me to tell you about the day your mother took you to see the dolphins for the first time?" Lucas's eyes widened. It was the first time his father had volunteered a memory of Catherine. Isabella moved silently to leave, but Leonardo reached out, holding her wrist gently. "Stay," he asked. "Please." And so, in the early hours of that morning, the walls truly began to come down. Leonardo shared stories about Catherine, her laughter, her love of the sea, her passion for life. Lucas fell asleep smiling, finally getting to know a little more about the mother he had lost so early. Isabella's unintentional revelation created a subtle tension in the Cortez mansion. In the days that followed, Leonardo oscillated between moments of disconcerting closeness and exaggerated professional distance. To complicate matters further, Lucas, with his childlike perceptiveness, began to notice the changes in the dynamic between his father and his caregiver. One particularly cold November morning, during a physiotherapy session in the heated pool, Lucas decided to broach the subject in his own way. "Isabella, do you like my father?" The question caught her off guard, making her almost drop her flotation device. "Of course I do, Lucas. Your father is a good man." "Not like that," he insisted, his green eyes sparkling with wit. "You like him like Mom liked him. I saw you looking at each other at dinner yesterday. Isabella felt her face burn. Lucas, the relationship between your father and me is strictly professional, but he smiles differently when you're around, like in the old photos with Mom. Before Isabella could reply, Margaret appeared at the edge of the pool. Ms. Martinez, Mr. Cortez requests your presence in the office immediately. On the way to the office, Isabella tried to calm her racing heart. She found Leonardo standing looking out of the window, his tense posture giving away his unease. We need to set some limits, he said without turning around. Mr. Cortez, if this is about what happened the other night, it's about everything. He interrupted her, finally turning around. About how Lucas is getting too attached. About how things are changing. Change isn't always bad. It is when it puts my son's well-being at risk. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Isabella already recognized as a sign of anxiety. Lucas has lost his mother. I can't allow him to become attached to someone who could leave at any moment. Like all the other nannies you've dismissed. Her voice carried a hint of defiance. Exactly. It was safer that way. Safe for whom? Mr. Cortez. For Lucas or for you? The silence that followed was heavy. Leonardo approached his desk, picking up an old photo. Catherine and I met in college. She was everything I wasn't. Spontaneous. Full of life. She said I needed to learn to dance in the rain instead of just worrying about building shelters. Isabella took a step forward. And she was right. When I lost her, her voice faltered. I promised that I would never allow anyone to become so important again. That I would protect Lucas from any similar pain. But you're failing miserably at that, she said softly. He stared at her, surprised by her frankness. You're failing because love isn't something we can control, Mr. Cortez. Your son needs to learn to love, to trust, to connect with people. Even if that means risks. Like you. The question came out almost as a whisper. Like anyone he chooses to let into his heart. Leonardo reduced the distance between them, his eyes fixed on hers. What about me, Ms. Martinez? What choices do I have? Isabella's heart raced. The same as all of us. We can hide behind walls or... She didn't finish her sentence. Leonardo had come even closer, his hand lightly touching her face. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Dad, Isabella. Lucas' voice broke the spell. Look what I managed to do in the pool. They moved away quickly like teenagers caught red-handed. Lucas rushed into the office, soaking wet and beaming. Margaret on his heels with a towel. I'm sorry, Mr. Cortez. He insisted on showing off his swimming progress. Leonardo looked at his son, then at Isabella, and finally at the photo of Catherine on his desk. It was as if 3 different worlds were colliding in his mind. Lucas, you need to dry off and warm up, said Isabella, regaining her professional composure. Come on before you catch a cold. As she led Lucas out, Leonardo called out to her, Ms. Martinez. She stopped at the door, without turning around. Tomorrow night, after Lucas has gone to sleep, can we continue our conversation? I'm not sure we should, Mr. Cortez. Please? The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. We need to sort this out. For Lucas. For Lucas. She agreed softly, knowing that they were both lying. It wasn't just for Lucas. And that was exactly the problem. That night, checking the security cameras one last time, Leonardo stopped at the image of Isabella reading to Lucas before bed. Her son was snuggled up against her, smiling as she made different voices for each character in the story. What should I do, Catherine? He murmured to the picture of his late wife. The silence that followed seemed fraught with possibilities and unspoken fears. The night promised for the conversation never happened. An unexpected storm hit Boston, bringing with it not only rain and strong winds, but also a severe respiratory crisis in Lucas. The humid weather and the sudden drop in temperature triggered one of the worst crises he had ever faced. Leonardo and Isabella spent a sleepless night in the boys' room, each dealing with the fear differently. While she maintained the outward calm needed to administer medication and monitor vital signs, he paced the room like a caged lion, alternating between phone calls to doctors and moments of pure yet contained panic. His heart rate is too fast, Isabella murmured, watching the monitor. We need to calm him down. I've already called the ambulance, replied Leonardo, his face pale with worry. No, she said firmly. A trip to hospital in this storm will only worsen his condition. Trust me. Their gazes met through the dimness of the room, lit only by the soft glow of the star projector. Lucas gasped between them, his little battle for breath echoing painfully. "Mr. Cortez," she called softly. "I need you to sit here." "What?" "Sit on the bed. Lean back against the pillows." When he hesitated, she insisted. "Please." Leonardo obeyed, albeit reluctantly. Isabella then positioned Lucas between his father's arms, the boy's back against Leonardo's chest. "Now, breathe with me, slowly and deeply. Lucas will feel your rhythm, and try to follow naturally." For long minutes, the three of them remained like this, breathing in sync. Gradually, Lucas' breathing stabilized, his muscles relaxing against his father. "Tell a story," he asked in a weak voice. Leonardo froze. It was Catherine who always told the stories. "It was a stormy night," began Isabella, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "Much like this one. The sea was rough and a small boat was struggling against the waves." "No," Lucas interrupted. "I want Dad to tell you." The panic in Leonardo's eyes was palpable. Isabella gently touched his hand, a brief but comforting gesture. It was a summer night," he began hesitantly, "when your mother and I met. She was dancing in the rain on the university campus, and I thought she was crazy." The story flowed naturally after that, long-held memories finding voice. Lucas listened, fascinated, his eyes heavy with sleep, but refusing to close them so as not to miss any detail. "She said that life was too short to wait for the sun," Leonardo continued, his voice breaking, "that sometimes you have to dance in the storm." A particularly loud clap of thunder made Lucas cringe. Isabella immediately turned up the volume on the star projector, transforming the room into an ocean of soft light. "Look, Captain," she whispered. "Even storms can be beautiful when seen from the right place." Lucas finally fell asleep, his breathing now regular and peaceful. Leonardo, however, remained motionless, as if afraid that any movement might break the hard-won peace. "You can go and rest," he said softly to Isabella. "I'll stay with him." "I know you can stay with him," she replied, arranging the covers. "But you don't have to be alone." The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the rain against the windows, and Lucas's soft breathing. "Do you know what else Catherine told me that night?" murmured Leonardo after a long moment. "That some people are like lighthouses. They don't drive away the storm, but they help us navigate it." Isabella felt the weight of those words, understanding what he was really saying. "Mr. Cortez." "Leonardo," he corrected. "After tonight, I think we can dispense with the formalities." She nodded, a small smile on her lips. "Leonardo, sometimes lighthouses need guidance too. That's why they work in pairs," he replied, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart leap. The storm outside began to subside, but the one raging inside them was only beginning to gain strength. Lucas stirred in his sleep, muttering something about stars and oceans, unaware of the significant moment unfolding around him. Margaret found them like this the next morning, Lucas sleeping peacefully between them, Leonardo and Isabella sitting on opposite sides of the bed, united by their shared vigil, and something else that neither of them was ready to name. "Coffee's ready," she announced softly, noticing the dark circles under their eyes and the exchanged glances. "And the medical reports you requested have arrived, Mr. Cortez." "Thank you, Margaret," he replied, without taking his eyes off Isabella. "Please cancel my appointments for today. I'll stay at home." The assistant smiled discreetly as she left. Some storms, she thought, bring more than destruction. They bring renewal. The end of November brought with it not only the most intense cold, but also a noticeable change in the dynamics of the Cortez mansion. After the night of the storm, Leonardo started working more from home, his eyes often straying from the financial reports to observe Lucas's therapy sessions or the moments of study with Isabella. One particularly cold afternoon, while Lucas was taking his post-lunch siesta, Leonardo found Isabella in the library, organizing materials for the boys' school project. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Isabella straightened up, sensing the seriousness in his voice. "About Lucas. About us." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. "Richard found out more information about Catherine's accident," he continued, moving closer to the window. "The sabotage. It wasn't a competitor." Isabella left the papers on the table, giving her full attention to Leonardo. "It was someone inside the company. Someone I trusted." Her voice trembled slightly. "We found out yesterday. The former head of security, Maxwell Bennett, confessed everything to the police. Why are you telling me this? Leonardo turned to face her. Because I need you to understand why I built all these walls, why I installed so many cameras, why I'm so afraid of trusting, she added softly. Yes. He moved closer, stopping a few steps away from her. But you broke down every wall I built. With your honesty, your dedication to Lucas, A coughing fit coming from Lucas's monitor interrupted the moment. They both moved instinctively towards the door, but the sound soon ceased, indicating that the boy had gone back to sleep peacefully. See? Said Isabella with a small smile. Not all interruptions are emergencies. You've changed everything. Leonardo continued, as if he needed to say it before he lost his nerve. The way Lucas smiles now, how he talks about the future, how he finally gets to know his mother through your stories. Leonardo nodded, swallowing dryly. Catherine always said that true love isn't just about protecting, but about setting free. I didn't understand that until you came along. Leonardo. Isabella took a step back. I'm your employee. I look after your son. We can't or won't. The question caught her off guard. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I have my own walls, she finally admitted. William wasn't just a patient I lost. He was my brother. The silence that followed was deafening. For 3 years, I cared for him battling cystic fibrosis. I gave up everything. Relationships, career, personal life. When he left, she took a deep breath. I promised myself that I would never again allow myself to love someone I could lose. Leonardo reduced the distance between them, taking her hands in his. So we're two cowards, two wounded protectors, she corrected, not resisting the touch. Lucas asked me something yesterday, he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. He asked if it was wrong to be happy, even though he missed his mother. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes. And what did you say? I said that Catherine would be furious if we thought that honoring her memory meant living in sadness. At that moment, a sound of footsteps in the hallway made them separate quickly. Margaret entered, stopping abruptly as she sensed the charged atmosphere. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Cortez. The counsel is waiting on the line. Leonardo nodded, reluctant to break the moment. I'll be there in a minute. When Margaret left, he turned to Isabella one last time. Have dinner with me tonight, after Lucas goes to sleep. I don't think it's appropriate. Not as boss and employee, as Leonardo and Isabella. She hesitated, years of self-preservation fighting the urge to say yes. And Lucas already knows. In fact, he was the one who suggested that I stop being silly and ask you to dinner. An involuntary smile appeared on her lips. He said that, in those exact words. So, what do you say? Before she could answer, Lucas' sleepy voice sounded through the monitor. Dad? Isabella. Saved by the gong, she muttered, moving towards the door. That's not a no, observed Leonardo. It's not a yes either. Yet, his smile followed her up the stairs, making her heart dance in a way it hadn't felt for years. In Lucas's room, she found the boy sitting on the bed, rubbing his sleepy eyes. I dreamt about Mommy, he said when she sat down next to him. She was smiling and said she was happy. Isabella felt her heart squeeze. Is that so? Yes. And she said that sometimes you have to be brave to be happy. She looked at the door, where Leonardo was now standing, watching the scene with soft eyes. You know something, Lucas? I think your mother was very wise. So you're having dinner with Dad? Isabella laughed, surprised by the boy's insight. We'll see. Now how about we finish that project on Wales? The dinner took place, not that night, but a week later, when the first snow of winter began to fall on Boston. Leonardo had prepared everything with meticulous care. The table on the enclosed, heated veranda decorated with soft lights, the specially chosen menu, even a small jazz ensemble playing in the background. Isabella arrived punctually at 8 after putting Lucas to bed. She wore a simple navy blue dress that made her eyes sparkle like sapphires. I thought you said no, teased Leonardo, pulling out the chair for her. Technically, I never said no, she replied, smiling. I just put it off until I was sure. Sure of what? That it wouldn't harm Lucas. Leonardo poured wine for them both, his movements deliberately slow. And you came to a conclusion? Actually, it was Lucas who helped me decide. She took a small sip of wine. He showed me something today. Isabella took a folded piece of paper out of her pocket and handed it to Leonardo. It was a drawing. 3 figures holding hands under a starry sky. In the top corner, a 4th figure, surrounded by a golden glow, was smiling at the group. "He said you're our family," she explained softly. "You, him and me down here. And Catherine," her voice faltered a little, "blessing us from above." Leonardo looked at the drawing for a long moment, his eyes watering. He has the same gift as his mother for seeing beyond appearances. Dinner passed naturally, the conversation flowing between light and deep topics. They talked about their lives before they met, about William, about Catherine, about the fears they still carried, and the hopes they were beginning to nurture. "Do you know what I miss most about Catherine?" said Leonardo, as they shared a dessert. "Her ability to see beauty in everything, even in storms." "Like Lucas," observed Isabella. "Like you too." He reached for her hand on the table. "You brought color back into our lives, you know that." Before she could answer, a familiar sound came from Lucas. Monitor, coughing, followed by crying. "I'm going to check on him," said Isabella, getting up. "No." Leonardo held her hand. "Let me go. Stay and enjoy the wine." In Lucas's room, he found his son sitting on the bed, silent tears streaming down his face. "Hey champ." "Nightmare." Lucas shook his head. "Fear." "Of what?" "Of Isabella leaving like Mom." Leonardo sat on the bed pulling his son close. "Lucas, look at me. Your mother never wanted to leave us. And Isabella, she's not going anywhere. Promise." "I can't promise for the future, son. But I can promise that I'll do everything I can to keep her in our lives." "Will that do?" Lucas nodded, snuggling into his father's arms. "Dad?" "Huh? Do you still love Mom?" Leonardo kissed the top of his son's head. "I'll always love your mother. She gave me you, the greatest gift of my life. So, it's okay to love Isabella too." "Yes, son." The heart has infinite room for love. When he returned to the balcony, he found Isabella gazing at the falling snow. She was holding his coat, which she had forgotten on the chair. "Is Lucas all right?" "Yes. I just needed some answers." "And did you get them?" Leonardo approached, taking the jacket from her hands and placing it on his shoulders. "Actually, I think we all got some answers today." Isabella turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the soft lights of the balcony. "Leonardo, don't say anything yet," he asked. "Just dance with me." Soft music filled the room as they moved slowly, the snow falling outside creating an almost magical setting. "Catherine would be proud," whispered Isabella against his shoulder. "Of what?" "Of seeing you and Lucas living, not just surviving." Leonardo gently pushed her away so that he could look into her eyes. "That's thanks to you." "No. It's thanks to the 3 of us. And," she looked at the drawing of Lucas on the table, "thanks to her too." The snow continued to fall outside, but inside the heated balcony, something new was blossoming. It wasn't just love, but a deep understanding that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges, and that hearts, even bruised ones, have an infinite capacity for healing and renewal. "Isabella." "Yes. Thank you for teaching us to dance in the storm." She smiled, remembering the stories about Catherine. "Thank you for showing me that some lighthouses can be a home." Winter was beginning to show its first signs of retreat when the Cortez mansion experienced its first major test. Lucas had developed an infection that kept him hospitalized for 3 days, leaving Leonardo and Isabella on constant alert. At the hospital, their masks of composure were beginning to show cracks. Leonardo alternated between frantic calls to specialists and moments of anguished silence, while Isabella kept a tireless vigil by Lucas' bedside. "You need to rest," Leonardo insisted on the 3rd night, finding her dozing in an uncomfortable position in the bedroom armchair. "I'm fine," she replied, straightening up. "I'd rather stay here." "Why?" She hesitated before answering. "Because that's how I lost William. One night, I decided to go home and rest. When I came back in the morning," Leonardo crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. It was the first public display of affection between them. But at that moment, nothing else mattered apart from the mutual comfort they found in each other. "He's not William," she whispered against his hair. "And you're not alone this time." Lucas watched the scene through squinted eyes, a small smile on his pale lips. "You look like a couple from a movie," he murmured. They both broke apart, surprised to realize that he was awake. "How are you feeling, Captain?" asked Isabella, quickly regaining her professional composure. "Hungry," he replied. Can I have something besides that transparent stuff? He pointed to the serum. Leonardo laughed. The first genuine sound of joy in days. I'll see what the doctors allow. When they were alone, Lucas looked seriously at Isabella. You love my father, don't you? The direct question caught her off guard. Lucas. It's okay, he continued. Mom appeared in my dream yesterday. She said you have a heart as big as the ocean. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes. Your father and you are very special to me. Then why do you still pretend you're just our babysitter? The child's wisdom sometimes frightened her. It's complicated, darling. No, it's not. He insisted. It's complicated trying to understand why humpback whales sing. Love is easy. You just have to let it happen. Before he could reply, Leonardo returned with a doctor. The good news came in cascades. The infection was subsiding. The tests showed significant improvement, and Lucas could go home the next day. That night, while Lucas slept soundly for the first time in days, Leonardo met Isabella in the hospital cafeteria. The doctors say your dedication was crucial, he commented, taking a seat next to her. The way you kept up the respiratory physiotherapy even during the high fever. I just did my job. No. He took her hand on the table. You did much more than that. You fought for him like a mother would. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. Leonardo, marry me. The request caught her completely unprepared. What? Marry me? He repeated, now kneeling beside her, ignoring the curious glances of the other occupants of the cafe. Not because Lucas needs a mother or because I feel lonely, but because you turned our house into a home. Because you taught me that it's possible to love deeply twice in a lifetime, in different but equally true ways. But what about your fear of losing again? I'm still afraid, he admitted. I probably always will be. But Catherine taught me to dance in the rain, remember? And you showed me that some dances are worth the risk. Isabella looked down at her intertwined hands, tears streaming freely down her face. Does Lucas know about this? Leonardo smiled. Actually, he was the one who chose the ring. He took a small box out of his pocket, revealing a delicate sapphire ring surrounded by tiny diamond stars. He said it had to be blue like the ocean, because that's where you feel at home, Leonardo explained. And the stars are to remind us that we always have light, even on the darkest nights. How long have you been planning this? Since that night on the balcony. But I wanted to wait for the right moment. He paused. Although, after these last few days, I've realized that there is no perfect moment. There are only moments, and it's up to us to make them special. Isabella looked at the ring, at Leonardo kneeling in front of her, and thought of all the barriers she had built up after losing William. She thought of Lucas, of his innocent wisdom about love being easy. She thought of Catherine, blessing them in their dreams. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Leonardo's smile lit up the entire cafe. When he slid the ring onto her finger, discreet applause echoed around the room. I think we have an audience, she murmured, blushing. Let them see, he replied, pulling her into a gentle kiss. Some stories deserve witnesses. News of the engagement spread quickly. Margaret was the first to notice the ring on Isabella's finger when they returned from the hospital, and her knowing smile said that she probably already suspected it would happen. Isabella's transition from Nanny to Leonardo Cortez's official fiancé generated buzz in Boston's high society. The gossip papers tried to create sensationalist stories, but the dignity with which the couple handled the situation, always putting Lucas' well-being first, soon silenced the meanest tongues. One particularly significant morning, Leonardo found Isabella in Catherine's old bedroom, which had remained untouched for years. Are you sure you want to do this today? He asked, watching her look at the photographs on the walls. Lucas deserves to know more about his mother, she replied, gently touching a photo of Catherine smiling, pregnant, in front of the ocean. And I need to get to know her too. Leonardo hugged her from behind, both of them contemplating the memories preserved in time. She would have liked you. How can you be sure? Because you have the same sparkle in your eyes when you talk about making a difference in other people's lives. He paused, taking a deep breath. Catherine always said that our purpose in life is to leave the world a little better than we found it. Lucas appeared in the doorway, hesitant. May I come in? Of course, my love, Isabella called, holding out her hand to him. The boy approached cautiously, his green eyes, so similar to his mother's, taking in every detail of the room. She liked to collect shells, explained Leonardo, showing him a shelf full of different specimens. Each one had a story. Like this one. Lucas picked up a delicate pink shell. This one. Leonardo smiled at the memory. It was from the first time she felt you move. We were on the beach Nars and she swore you were dancing inside her to the sound of the waves. Isabella watched the interaction between father and son, her heart overflowing with love and respect for the woman who'd been so important in their lives. Can we keep some of her things in my room? Asked Lucas shyly. Of course we can, replied Leonardo. Actually, I was thinking of turning this room into something special. Like what? Asked Lucas and Isabella simultaneously. A memorial. A place where we can come whenever we want to feel her presence. With photos, her shells, her favorite books. And we could add new things too, suggested Lucas. Like photos of us. So she can see how happy we are. Leonardo felt tears well up in his eyes. That's a perfect idea, son. That afternoon, the three of them worked together, reorganizing the room, not to erase Catherine's presence, but to celebrate her in a new way. Isabella found a diary among the books and, with Leonardo's permission, began to read it. She wrote about you every day during her pregnancy. She told Lucas, "Look at this. Today, my little sailor has decided that 3 a.m. is the perfect time to practice swimming. Leonardo says he'll be an Olympic athlete, but I bet he'll be an ocean explorer." Lucas laughed. She was right. I love the sea. While sorting through the photographs, they found a particularly touching one. Catherine dancing in the rain. Her face lifted to the sky, radiant with happiness. This was on our wedding day, explained Leonardo. It started raining during the reception, and instead of getting upset she pulled everyone out to dance in the garden. Isabella smiled, imagining the scene. She really knew how to turn ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. Like you, said Lucas, hugging her around the waist. At night, after Lucas had gone to sleep, Leonardo found Isabella on the balcony, gazing at the stars. What are you thinking about? About how love has many forms, she replied. About how it's possible to honor the past while building the future. He hugged her, feeling the engagement ring between their intertwined fingers. Do you know what Catherine wrote in her last diary? Isabella shook her head. True love is not possessive. It is like the ocean. It has infinite space to hold all the currents, all the tides, all the lives that pass through it. She was very wise. Yes, she was. And I'd be happy to see us find our own tide. That night, before going to bed, Lucas asked to see the photo album once more. On the last page, he put the drawing he had made, his new family, including Catherine's golden glow in the sky. Now it's complete, he said, satisfied. Isabella and Leonardo exchanged an emotional look. Yes, it was complete. Not because they had replaced what had been lost, but because they had learned that love has the power to expand, to create new spaces without diminishing the old ones. And somewhere, Catherine smiled, pleased to see that her family had found not just comfort, but a new form of happiness. The wedding day dawned with a special clarity. The Cortez mansion had been transformed into a setting that blended elegance and intimacy. The ceremony would take place in the winter garden, where white and blue flowers created an atmosphere reminiscent of an illuminated seabed. Isabella was getting ready in her old bedroom, now converted into a temporary bridal suite. Margaret was helping with the last details of the dress, a simple ivory model with details that resembled soft waves. Something's missing, said Margaret, adjusting the veil. Lucas entered the room at that moment, impeccable in his little tuxedo, carrying an old box. Dad asked me to give you this, he said, holding out the package to Isabella. Inside was a pearl necklace and a handwritten note. Dear Isabella, Catherine wore these pearls at our wedding. She said they were special because, like true love, they were formed through time, patience, and adversity. Today, they belong to you, not to replace memories, but to create new ones. With love, Leonardo. The tears threatened to ruin the carefully done makeup. Margaret quickly intervened with a handkerchief. Let me help you with the necklace, she offered, her voice breaking. Lucas watched intently. You look beautiful. You look like a mermaid. Isabella knelt down to meet him, taking care with her dress. And you look like a real prince, my love. Can I tell you a secret? He whispered. I dreamt about Mom yesterday. Really? And what did she say? That she's happy because now she's sure we'll never be alone. He paused. "And she asked me to say thank you for looking after Dad's heart." In the winter garden, Leonardo waited anxiously. The judge was already in place, and the few selected guests took their seats. Soft music began to play. Not the traditional wedding march, but an oceanic melody reminiscent of whale songs. Lucas entered first, carrying the wedding rings. Then all breaths were taken away when Isabella appeared. Leonardo felt his heart stop for a moment when he saw the pearl necklace around her neck. It was as if Catherine was there, blessing this union. "We are gathered today," the judge began, "not only to celebrate a union but to honor the journey that has brought these souls to this moment." During the vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "Leonardo," began Isabella, her voice trembling slightly, "I promise not only to love you, but to honor the story that brought you to me. I promise to be a safe haven for you and Lucas. I promise to dance in the rain when life gets heavy. And I promise to keep alive the memory of the love that came before me." Leonardo took a deep breath before beginning his vows. "Isabella, you taught me that the heart has an infinite capacity for love. I promise to honor every part of who you are, to celebrate your strength and kindness, and to create with you and Lucas a future full of stars and waves. I promise to always remember that some storms bring blessings in disguise, and that true love knows no limits of time or space." Lucas, in his moment to hand over the rings, surprised everyone with his own words. "I promise to be the best son for both of you, and to keep all the love in my heart, that which is here and that which protects us from above." During the reception, which took place in the main garden, a light drizzle began to fall. Instead of running inside, the bride and groom smiled at each other. "I think someone wants us to dance in the rain," said Leonardo, holding out his hand to Isabella. The band started playing a soft version of La Mer, and soon all the guests joined in, dancing in the gentle rain. Lucas twirled among the adults, his crystal-clear laughter mixing with the music. Later, as the party began to wind down, the three of them met on the balcony, watching the rainbow that had formed. "Look!" exclaimed Lucas, pointing to the sky. "7 colors, like the 7 colors of love." "7 colors of love?" asked Isabella, curious. "Yes. Red is Mom's love, which is still here. Orange is Dad's love for us. Yellow is my love for you. Green is nature's love. Blue is your love, Isabella. The indigo is the love that is coming. And violet," he smiled mysteriously, "is the love we don't know yet." Leonardo and Isabella exchanged emotional glances. Somehow, that child had perfectly summed up the complexity of their feelings. "You know what?" said Leonardo, hugging them both. "I think I finally understand what Catherine meant about dancing in the rain." "What?" asked Isabella. "That sometimes we need to let life surprise us, that the best moments come when we least expect them, and that love, true love, has many ways of manifesting itself." Night fell softly over the Cortez mansion, now no longer a place of shadows and fears, but a home where different kinds of love coexisted harmoniously. In Catherine's memorial room, a gentle breeze swayed the curtains, making the shells hanging in the window tinkle, like a last blessing for the family who had learned that love, in all its forms, is eternal. The end. If you could write a letter to keep in the memorial room, as the Cortez family did for Catherine, what memories or unspoken feelings would you want to preserve for someone special? Leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.